The following program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.
Welcome to Gate City Chronicles. I'm Kevin Avard, your host, and today we're going to be talking about the weather. And I have, oh my gosh,
Ron Moore.
No, we were just talking about your son, Josh. I was going to call you the weather chaser there, but that wouldn't work either. But
that's good. The weather chaser, the storm chaser, yeah.
The storm chaser.
All the above. Storm chasing.
When I was a little kid, my dad, he'd drive me to school, and we'd have to listen to the Weather Hawk.
Yeah.
It's time for the weather, because he's the Weather Hawk. Whatever.
That's pretty cool. I never heard of that one.
No, it was.
Where was that based out of?
I believe Mass, but
yeah.
It was a little jingle. And,
yeah.
Never.
And they stick with you too.
It always does.
The jingles do.
So, do you have a jingle for your?
No. I know, speaking of Josh, his favorite jingle is the sound of sirens going off, so he has one of them on his cell phone. I said, please don't have that when you're up there at the State House going on.
Right.
Because that's what we hear out in the Great Plains when we're chasing. You know it's really getting bad when the sirens start going off in town.
So you're an actual weather chaser.
Yeah, we've got storm chasing. I grew up in West Texas, chased my first tornado in 1980, 81, I can't remember exactly.
That's when it wasn't popular, right?
It was, nobody knew what it was. No one knew what it was. And I've continued on and off, and I've been doing steady now for the last 15, 16 years. We've gone out there.
How do you make a living chasing storms?
You don't. That's our vacation each year. We did it. Now, when I was at Florida State.
What do you want to do? Well, let's go chase some tornadoes.
Exactly. Well, it makes it entertaining, too. If a conversation gets boring, you just jump into, hey, you see our picture? Not baby pictures. You drop out your Twister pictures. But when I was in Florida State in 2000, took a group of researchers out there. It was more of a field trip for us. It was like 4 of the doctors down there wanted to go out. They said, take us tornado chasing. So I took them out there, and it's funny, we came back after 4 days. We bagged a couple of small tornadoes. That's what they call when you catch one, okay? Get back to Tallahassee. Today, Florida State has a division of tornado research in the geography department. It started on that day.
Is that right?
It started, I found that out last year. I contacted the doctor I work with. He said, yeah, we started studying. And because when I was at Florida State, we were studying hurricane climate. My job was to actually build a digital atlas. We worked with certain government agencies to build a digital atlas for hurricane strikes on the coastline to see what was causing them, how frequent, how intense, are they worse, are they not worse? Are we just, for a better word, are we just kind of sissified now where we can't handle storms, which in some cases is true. If there's any older generation folks out there, they know back then you just kind of sucked it up. Today, state of emergency, I heard, down in the mid-Atlantic for 3 inches of snow.
Right.
State of emergency
is watching the weather.
It's just tossed around, the term. It's like, that used to be a big deal.
Yeah, Tennessee, I'm looking at the roads, and there's just a little ice on there, and they can't function.
We're not as tough as we used to be. We're really not, and I don't, a lot of ways you could phrase that.
I watched a documentary a little while back on the dust storm and the Dust Bowl.
Yep.
Pretty amazing situation where it was that would be considered a man-made problem by tilling the soil, and it created its own climate change.
Interesting that you know that, because that is what they did. They lined up the tractors from North Oklahoma to Nebraska, and they just drove west toward the setting sun. They shut them off at night. They drove them again the next day. It was a huge effort to till the soil and plant the land, everything out there. And they actually understood back then climate cycles and stuff, but they thought they could manage it, and they didn't. And it got out of hand, and you're exactly right.
There was one dust storm that actually reached New York City.
Yes, it was. In fact, that same dust storm that reached New York City and Washington, rain behind it, and it looked like blood running off the cars, and there's newspapers. I used to have one. I collect old weather stuff, old weather books, everything you can imagine from 200 years ago. It says the apocalypse, blood raining on Washington. It showed men with their hats and the red pouring off.
Why was it red? Because of the red soil?
Yeah, the dust had come on, and they literally thought it was Revelation being fulfilled.
Oh, that's interesting.
Isn't it?
Wow.
Because you had World War I, II, you're in bookends there, right?
Yeah.
You have Hitler rising up, you have the bloody Valentine's Day massacre in Chicago, you have murder rates in the mafia going through the roof in the Northeast. So everybody thought this has got to be the end.
Right, and then of
all
course
hell's
the big
breaking
dust.
loose. And
Right.
then voila, here we are, 80.
Sure.
It's funny how, things do that. But yeah, you're right. It was a man-made thing. That literally was where we changed and altered a region.
Unlike our understanding today, what's going on, we've talked a lot about the climate change, and first it was global warming, and I swear, when I was a kid, I remember everybody saying, we're going to go into an ice age
was.
again, and it was in the 60s, and we were all panicking about that.
Yeah.
It's as though that these are trumped up so that they can get some policies in place.
They are.
And of course, now they're in your higher education, where, it's gospel that we have global warming. Uh-oh. It's not global warming, so now it's climate change. And I find it alarming because, if you go to the web and you look at all the nonprofits on a global scale with regard to climate change, it's a big industry.
And I'll give you one up worse than that. I'm involved with the church as well, ministering. The church signed on to this thing about 10 years ago. Most mainline denominations and groups signed on with the climate change thing, the global warming, and they said, we want to be stewards of the environment. Okay, well, steward the environment. I'm all for it. I'm for clean air, clean water, not pollution, and recycling. I love those things. I'm for green energy. If somebody's got an innovative idea, that's great, but don't make the state force it on them. Let the innovation and capitalism and free market take over and do that thing. But you're exactly right. That it's trumped up and it's made a lot of money for a lot of people.
It seems to me, if you go back to the days of Galileo and the science way back when, he was pretty much ridiculed for his beliefs.
He was.
And what had happened is because he went against popular belief. It could cost your life back then.
Yep.
Back then, it might have been the church, or it might have been actually it might have been the church that would come in and say, "Hey, look, you're a heretic." And now it's not the church; it's the higher ed, or the saying, "Hey, we got climate change, and it's because of all the automobiles." And well, I'm not so sold on that. I think at one point, there were glaciers.
The Vikings grew grapes in Greenland. There you go. That's the phrase.
The land shifts. The Earth is in constant change as it is.
Absolutely.
If you just look at the continents and things. So I think I'm not really sure we're being sold a bill of goods. Maybe we are. Maybe we're not. I'm looking at this winter.
Well, that's the problem. Here's how, and I tell my son this too. My family, I say, keep it simple. There's that KISS principle: keep it simple, stupid, right? So keeping it simple, you told me 10 years ago, the people said, we're not going to have snow or winter anymore. Yeah, that's gone. And we're going to have increased hurricanes.
Ted Danson said we are not.
Everybody did.
Yeah, I remember.
IPCC said it in 2007, 2011, International Panel of Climate Change. They said that. But they also said there'd be increased tornadoes and hurricanes, radical hypercanes. Tornadoes would be massive storms coming. Well, I chase both of those. Yes, I chase hurricanes and tornadoes. And there's been hardly anything to chase.
Been kind of quiet.
That's right. I go out at the top of the season. I go at the end of May, early June, out to the Great Plains. I know where they are. I know every back road. I know 8 states by heart. The kids do too. We've done this for years. And it's a bit of research we do. It's not just a family vacation, but we research. I'm studying and taking notes and whatever I can do for my own private stash, as it were. But there hasn't been an increase. And so, and here's the thing you got to do that I think is really cool. And I know we'll get to that in a minute, but to compare a storm to a storm, like the book that I've got, okay? Yeah. Comparing a storm to a storm, the storms in the past were much worse than they are today. They were much worse.
Interesting.
We're going through a cycle. We're probably going to hit a cycle here in the next few years where tornadoes and hurricanes are going to get really bad again. Mm. And New England will get a 38 hurricane. If this winter is doing this kind of number on New England, that is a snow country to begin with, and we can't hardly handle the snow. And I'm not mocking. People up here, it is hard and the cold.
Sandy was a pretty big storm, right?
And yet Sandy still wasn't a major hurricane. And it's interesting you mentioned that one because the next book I've got in the summer is actually going to compare Sandy to the 1821 hurricane that was a Category 5 when it hit New York City.
Interesting.
And everybody agrees on that storm. You can read the current research that's done.
Now, they're talking about the polar caps and how that they're decreasing. And I'm hearing conflicting data now about that. People are concerned about the Gulf Stream slowing down a little bit. Is that true? Is it slowing down? Is it speeding up? Is it not melting fast?
That one I don't know. I haven't looked at anything having to do with the Gulf Stream per se. The old books, at least recently, the old books that I've collected date back to like some of them late 1700s. They're all meteorology books. They're really old weather books. Some of them, it's funny, I started buying them about 3 years ago off eBay. They were $10 a piece. Now they're $5,000 a piece.
Interesting.
Because everybody's buying them up. They're buying up diaries, journals, anything. And I've got a lot of this stuff. And they mentioned back then how the seeing icebergs coming down the west coast of England and stuff like this. And they would mention things like I've got, is it Jefferson, Thomas Jefferson, or has it Ben Franklin? It's Ben Franklin. He makes a comment in 1792, a direct statement from him is, climate is changing, the world will never be the same again. And then he goes into this whole diatribe where Franklin begins to list out what has changed in the climate in Europe and America since they've been here. And he says, what is going on?
Those automobiles are just
It has
nuts.
always, exactly. We weren't even in the industrial age, Charlie. You know, you're talking, this is, and you go back to the CO2 that you're discussing. You know, CO2, if you want to mess with emissions and try and make things less polluting and things, I'm all fine with that stuff. Just don't pass these, draconian policies that change everything under the sun and then put people in jeopardy. One thing, Boston, check them out. Now they're dumping the snow in the harbor. They couldn't do it because of EPA regulations down there, right? They couldn't put it in there because of all the salt. Now they're just throwing everything in there because they said we don't have another place to put it. We need better policymakers. And I know that's not necessarily what the show is about tonight, but maybe it is. Policymakers. You need people in government who know what they're doing and have a clue, or at least you don't have to know everything, but know the people who do know that thing.
Right.
So you can get that information and pull it in. And if we do, we can survive what's coming. We can, but if we're not ready for it, it's really going to do a number. Because a 38 hurricane coming through New England would be devastating. It'd knock out New England for 6 months.
Now, I've never heard that term at 38, and I've heard of 0.1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Yeah. This is the 1938. That's what I'm referring to the year.
Oh, I
It's
see.
the 1938 hurricane, hurt the Long Island Express
Okay.
and all that. But when that thing came through New Hampshire, for instance, the winds at Concord hit 138 miles an hour.
Was that like Camille or something?
Yeah, it was actually called the Long Island Express. They didn't start naming them until the 40s. So this predates the naming period. But the 38 storm came up the coast, and most people, some of your viewers out there probably know about it because it came through this whole region, or at least they've heard about it from their grandparents or what have you. But when it tore through, I mean, it devastated New England. The winds all the way to Canada were over 100 miles an hour. I mean, it would clear cut, trees would be knocked down, power lines, they don't fall like in an ice storm, they just throw them into the woods, you know? And Camille was bad, you're right. Mississippi comes off Virginia. I studied that track all the way through. That would take out 18 states. We haven't had nothing like that. Katrina stopped down there. Katrina hit New Orleans and just kind of fiddled around, you know, messed up that region pretty bad. But and that disaster was mostly New Orleans.
So do we look for a La Nina or an El Nino? Or
You mean preferable? Which one you want?
yeah,
They both have different patterns with them, and both will lead to one thing or the other. One will lead to a worse winter, but one will lead to droughts over here. It's just shifting back and forth. You need both. Both of them are just the oscillating ocean currents in both the oceans, the Pacific and the Atlantic, and more. There's the Indian Ocean, which also has an effect. In fact, last year, the reason the hurricane seasons weren't as bad, and I did think we'd have a bad hurricane season last year, admit it here. I didn't get that right. Everybody thought it would be bad, but no one expected the Indian Ocean, I believe it was, sending all these dust storms across Africa, just crushed everything. So it's a planet that's tied together, which is the way the Creator designed it, by the way, where everything kind of feeds in and does that. So, and again, we were talking before the show, people say global warming. Well, we're freezing in New England. Yeah, but they're warm over in the West Coast. Yeah, but global means everywhere at one time. Well, everywhere is not warm at one time. Granted, the coldest air in the world is over Northeast America right now, USA. And it'll probably be sitting here. Your viewers out there watching, we're in mid-February. We're probably going to see, it'll warm up some. It can't stay this cold. Eventually, it has to release that, not energy, but break up a little. But boy, we're in for a lot of snow. I think we've got a lot of snow and ice coming through February, March.
So they're looking at another 8 inches for record breaking.
Yeah, and I think they'll do that without a problem.
Interesting.
I think they'll do that without a problem. I think this
I
weekend.
have a weird sense of, oh, that's cool.
Yeah, I do too.
Well, you might as well break the record seeing how we've gone this far.
It is fascinating. I mean, in meteorology, when I was at Florida State, they had what they call the fair weather meteorologists. They were the scientists. Okay, they were the people going for a PhD. Then they had the nuts, the storm chasers like me, and every time they'd come into class, they'd throw up a slide, and it would have tornadoes and hurricanes. And understanding, I'm ministering in Florida at the time. I'm a pastor of a small church, right? It was growing and everything. But I'd have to go in there loving storms. Well, storms are not good for people, you know what I mean? So my take was always, well, they bring water. I mean, up here, the snow is great for the groundwater. I mean, you're avoiding a drought. So if civilly we can prepare for these things and have our government in place and have our nonprofits and people educated, you can handle it. But if everybody thinks it's going to get warmer and not snow again, oh my gosh, especially in New England.
So what's the title of your book?
It is called Storm Warriors. That's the series, and then the first one is Saving a King. And what the premise of the book is, it's a family, it's these kids, and yes, it's kind of based on our chases. The boys read it, both of my sons, they've chased many storms and stuff, and they said, boy, this sounds just like us. I said, yes. So as the premise is this family chases storms. Their dad's a minister, but he's also an atmospheric researcher, meteorologist, so it kind of...
So Rep. Josh Moore has been chasing storms.
Yes, Josh Moore has chased storms since he was, let me see how old he was 11? 11 is his first tornado. They've been in a lot of disasters. They've been in Hurricane Isaac.
Close calls?
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, it was funny because we were on the Union Leader. We've been on NECN. We've been on WMUR. We've been on a lot. They've Skyped us in before from the hotel room. They've Skyped us into the news in Manchester. And when people found out I had my kids with me, it was like, oh my gosh, that's abuse and everything. Oh. And I think, no, that's not reasonably. I said, I can understand. I said, however, I said, there's a lot of places you can put your children to be dangerous. Out hunting, you got guns, which I'm for that too. I said, I think it's great. I said, if you know what you're doing as the parents and you feel like you can be responsible in what you're doing, I'm good with it. Right. I don't have a right to tell you not to do it.
I can tell you there are many times when I went fishing with my dad where I'm looking back, I'm thinking, what are you thinking, Dad? Well, we had to get rescued a few times by the Coast Guard, yeah.
It's funny, we've done more rescuing out there, actually helping people out while we were there. And the thing we do, here, you see the chasers on TV, we don't get that close. We've always stayed at least a mile away. I get all the, oh, Dad, get closer. I wouldn't do it. I want stuff falling on the car. That's why last year when the chasers died out there and the Weather Channel got caught in it, I said, you shouldn't be that close. You should not be that close. And it's easy to get your guard down because the adrenaline's pumping like crazy. And so what we did, this book actually takes and compares a real story in Tupelo, Mississippi of 1936, a real F5 tornado, to the one they had a couple of years ago that was called, in all the media, the worst one they'd ever had. And I did a comparison, just simple stuff. And the book's not agenda-driven. It's not like anti-climate change or anything. It's really a fun story. It's written for kids, but these kids chase back in time to go after the storm. And when they do this, they also meet some characters. In that storm, Elvis Presley almost died. He was 1 year old. Most people don't know that.
Yes.
So he's going to go back, and they're going to save him. I read all the stories around it. So they go back and save Elvis, learning some stuff there. They learn he goes to church. That's where he's the music leader in church.
Kind of doing like that Rush Limbaugh thing with the...
And I had the idea before that. When he started his book and some others, I'm like, man, this is amazing. I'm on the right track here. And it's something I love. I mean, when I got into it, I wrote it, and then, I've done a lot of things on my own, and then I had some people kind of edit it for me, and when they got into it, we were able to keep the framework that I had.
Is there any illustrations with it? Or
not in this one. Okay. Just the front cover, which is amazing. It's a guy here locally in Merrimack, a young man who did up that for me. He's going to be doing the illustrations for our future books. He's really good. Wow. So the front cover, you can see it. It's the kids running along and the tornado coming in the background. That's pretty cool. What we do in each book, too, and then they're going to, like I said, they'll chase one in the present. There's a lot of chasing. The book is action-oriented. And what's really fun is, and trust me, I had the people in our church and my friends read it and tell me the truth, what they really thought before we finally, said, does this really make sense? And they said, man, it follows all the way through and it actually ends.
Nice.
Some books don't end. You're not sure even how this one was no problem tying it up because they're getting ready to do another adventure. In it, I'm putting the old stuff I've collected over the years, and most of these stuff is copyright neutral. It doesn't matter, it's so old.
Right.
I can actually put this stuff, because I own it, in the book and hand out history with it. So the kids are picking up secrets and tips as they go along, like a tornado safety
sheet. Seems like a lot of people now are starting to do the books that teach history in that type of format. We just had a gentleman on. He was talking about how we got our symbols for some of the sports.
Yeah.
Well, there's a history behind that symbol, behind the tomahawks or whatever.
It's cool. I know.
And I thought that's a really nice way to teach history. And,
it is.
If you're interested in sports, you're interested in mascots. Yeah. Well, there's a story behind that. And,
there is.
It's something that you just don't think about, but that's interesting. And to think whether the same way, I would assume.
Yeah, and this is for people who have. Now, I have adults reading it that like it too. I'm a nonfiction guy. I like data and information and science. So I did go back, because it took me a year to do it. I researched, went to the library. They already knew me there. I pulled out all the kids' books and started reading them. I said, okay, that's about where I'm at with this stuff. And I love what I'm doing here. I think it's really good for children reading it at night, as a story. It's even written with enough data and information to make it knowledgeable, but exciting. But at the same time, the kids can sleep when they're listening to it. Because when you're talking about storms, hurricanes, and tornadoes, people die.
Yeah,
And how do you give a story like that without making it grimacing? So there's some heavy points in it, but just enough to make the kids
people's
think.
lives are devastated.
That's right.
Big
And you
time.
say that this is really horrific, and then the next thing they know, they're going on to the next step. How do we change that next time? And that's the point of the book. The adults are not the main part of the story, but they're like, you too can change that.
So, what are some of the things that we should be looking at as far as getting prepared for future events and whatnot, as far as climate change? We know it's going to change because it's on a cycle.
Yeah, exactly. You're talking about the cyclical nature, sure. Well, in I'm going to get it messed up here.
Yeah, you're going like
the Worcester tornado.
You go to like 100-year cycles, 200-year cycles, 500-year cycles?
They vary a little bit. They vary some. You had the Worcester tornado in the 50s, which studied pretty extensively. I've got all the old newspapers and things. We're in a pattern that is very similar to that. So a couple of years ago, 3 years, had the Springfield tornado. We were all, remember that one? I had it on video. Me and Josh almost made it over there to that. We were in Worcester and we got stuck because everything went dead.
How long ago was that?
This is, I think, 3 years ago now.
Already?
Yeah, it's been flying by. But the conditions were set, and people were like, wow, they really can happen here. Worcester had one of the biggest tornadoes in U.S. history in the 50s. I keep thinking, is it 52 or 57? But that was a monster tornado. Merrimack, New Hampshire had an F4 tornado in 1821, I believe it was. So New England's had some big tornadoes. New England should be, which again goes back to these books we're writing, they're not just fun, but they're also informational. How would you protect yourself?
I remember in the 70s, I believe, maybe really early 70s, in Nashville, we might have had a small tornado. My sisters and I my dad was working, and I remember we just got in the living room, we put blankets over our head, and it sounded like a freight train was coming down Harbor Ave.
Really?
Yeah, it was maybe just...
And you did the right thing.
Yeah.
The pillows of the head and stuff like we do that in the book. We do it, and it's part of the story, so that it sounds fun, but it's what you should do. And hopefully if kids are reading that, they know that's the way to do it. Yeah, we've...
Don't be jackass and get a parachute.
Oh, man.
I'm going for a ride.
The worst tornado we had, and this is actually in the book, believe it or not, so I won't give the whole thing away, but the boys, it was 3 years ago, we're in Kansas, we see a tornado come through, and a farmer comes up behind us, and he's out there talking to my son and everything. My son runs over, he goes, Dad, he said, the sirens aren't for the tornado over there. He said, there's one over this way. I said, there's nothing down there. And right out, then we see a blue explosion, and we see this monster vortex on the ground. I mean, it's so close that stuff's spraying in our direction. So we jump in the SUV, we pull around the side of the building, and then it picks up the rear end of the SUV and slides us a little bit up, maybe a foot over, and there's sheet metal, the roof is peeling. That's the closest we've ever been, but we didn't mean to be there. So 2 tornadoes at once.
You can't really outrun these things, can you?
No. That's why I was surprised when I saw them on the TV,
if
drive
you see
faster.
one, you don't. How can you tell if it's going that way? Obviously, you just go the opposite way. But
if I saw one coming, and we've been close enough to them before, we would slow down. I'd say, and I've got 4 eyes. I got me, my wife, my 2 sons, and they can spot this stuff quick. I say, which way is it moving? They said, you need to stop. If I'm on a without a median divider, I can whip around and go back the other way, right? When we go chasing, there's 3. Hey, A, B, C. A is hotspot. A is where everybody in the world will be, including Discovery Channel. And we've been out there with them. The Dominator's near us. I mean, we're tucked in between these big, huge iron beasts and stuff. If they all show up, I usually leave and go to spot B, which may be 50 miles away.
why?
I don't want to get caught in the cluster. I don't want to get caught in the mess, because that's what's going to happen. If I can be as smart all day long as I can be, but if you break down in front of me or get stuck in a ditch and I can't move, I'm stuck. And we've seen that happen numerous times out there. So now we actually go to option C. And it's really funny, a quick story. Last year, we ended up at my best friend's house in Midland, who I went to high school with. He hadn't chased in 30 years. We used to do it in high school. I said, you want to go with us? He did. They're dropping like flies, twisters. There's 1,000 cars around us, tower cams in the sky. And he goes, man, we used to have a little red ice chest between us and no one, but maybe a highway patrol out there with us. No one else on the scene.
And we're doing this just as a hobby.
It's a hobby, although it's making good money for people. Now, people are tapping into it, and there's
they're making vehicles to
there's all sorts of things, industrial. It's just. I talked to my dad the other night, who's a retired minister in Florida, and I told him, I said, how dare you told me not to chase no one will ever make money at it. Look at this, these guys are making a ton of cash.
Yeah, do you ever follow the storms that don't make land at all? I mean,
you mean like the hurricanes? You mean?
Yeah, I mean, just storms out on the waters. I mean, you don't maritime type of storms.
I would. You know what? I love water and I love fishing and stuff, but I don't have much access to boats or getting out there like that. But I would think it'd be fascinating, especially around Cape Cod where they do have the water spouts. Kind of like the Keys are the same way. It'd be fascinating to sit out there and watch that stuff. I love it, especially for the open view. I mean, obviously here in New Hampshire, which by the way, I love New England, love New Hampshire. but it's pretty hilly and pretty treed up. It's hard to see. By the time you see it, it's right up on you.
I love it, man.
I do too.
My father
Now,
and I
you're
lived in-
fishing, right? You guys did fishing.
Oh, we did fishing, yeah. In
Saltwater, freshwater?
Well, we did both, but the ocean, you can be out there on a calm day, and then at some point, the waves start really picking up. And there were a few times where,
How far off were y'all?
Well, sometimes we couldn't see land, and we're in a 19-foot metal boat, and
Wow.
and there was an old
guys were
65 horse.
gutsy.
Well, it was pretty interesting. And I had no clue. I just wanted to catch fish.
Now, would you do that now by yourself, or have you?
I haven't by myself, no.
Yeah.
But I we could still go out in a 35-foot boat that I don't have a problem with. But I'm looking back, I'm thinking, Dad, you took some big. We went tuna fishing, couldn't see land, and sometimes the motor would only go in reverse.
That's too funny.
We'd be gone in
So I don't have to feel so bad about taking my kids out.
Oh no, and then some of the waves would be so big, and they'd be holding the front, and they'd say, "Kevin, go sit at." I'd be at the bow
To weight it?
and I'd hold up an oar, and that would be the clue for the helicopters to come. They'd drop their little chalkboard. Are you okay? No.
That's funny, man. You guys did get into some situations.
Oh, yeah. They had to tow us in, and that's embarrassing. And
It's adventure, though, right?
well, I wanted to fish.
Yeah.
I was very myopic. I just wanted
Yeah.
to fish, but great times with my dad. But there were some times too there where that wasn't too smart.
It's funny.
But I guess we're having fun. But
That's funny.
yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting.
So we got about a minute left. How do people find your book?
Amazon. Go to Amazon. It's the only place it's selling right now. It's an ebook. So if you got a Kindle or if you got an iPad or whatever else, it'll show up on there. But Amazon.com. Look up Storm Warrior Saving a King. It'll take you right to it. They can also go to Facebook, the Storm Warning, and we've been putting it on there as well. So
Okay.
once they get on Amazon, they should have it.
And you have some other ideas for books too?
Yeah, I hope there's going to be a series. The next one will compare Superstorm Sandy to the 1821 hurricane.
Right.
They hit the same area, same location. Was Sandy as bad as everybody says, or is there something much, much worse that could happen?
Not diminishing the people that
Absolutely
suffered
not.
underneath it. It's
Terrible.
It's a matter, Katrina, the whole 9 yards.
Yep.
But
You're exactly right. And those people really went through it. They went through, both of those people went through incredibly tough times and stuff. The thing is, we shouldn't have to go through those things. There's the policy part, which is government, which is what, and then there's the prediction and making sure people get out and stuff.
in your opinion, real quickly, do you think George Bush, by making a state of emergency at the time, was sufficient enough to give preamble warning?
He gave 3 days in advance before Katrina hit. First time in history that's been done by a sitting president. He's the first one to ever do that. He got no credit.
He got credit for the storm.
Yeah, it blew me away. I said, for other things you might pick on him
No
for.
pun intended.
That one he did 3 days in advance. And, as long as we're ready, we'll get them. We'll know what to do.
Yeah. Well, thanks for coming on the show.
Appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
All right.
Love it.
We hope you enjoyed Gate City Chronicles. If you have a story to tell, or you want to come on the show, contact me at gatecitychronicles@gmail.com. Until next week, thanks for watching. Thank you for watching Gate City Chronicles, and we want to thank our sponsor, Aardvark, the Dean of Clean. You can reach them at 603-521-7657. If you need your carpets clean, call Aardvarks.
The preceding program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.